All right, hello everyone. Welcome back. Especially if you were just in the last event that we wrapped up a couple of minutes ago. And I'm so excited that you are here this evening with us. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Left Bank Books presents local St. Louis authors James Erwin and Vicki Berger Erwin, who will discuss their new book, Missouri, 200 Years of Historic Crimes. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of James and Vicki, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. Left Bank Books offers curbside pickup and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. We are happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. We hope that you enjoy this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a signed copy for you or for all of your friends at left-bank.com. Purchasing a signed copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff operating, and it allows us to keep this event series going. And a special note that James and Vicki will be coming by to sign books, and you can get your book personalized. I will be getting mine personalized to my parents for upcoming Mother's Day, Father's Day present, because I know that they will absolutely love this book. So think about more than just you. Think about people in your life that you would love to give this book to, because it is definitely a book that is great for giving. So I want to thank you for your support. I am Shane Mullen. I am the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from you, the audience, at the end of the event. So you can type your questions as a comment, and you can do that at any point in time throughout the event, because I might sneak it in early, because special treat, James and Vicki will be in conversation with me this evening. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. About Notorious, Missouri. From the duel on Bloody Island to the Missouri miracle kidnapping and recovery of Sean Hornbeck, Missouri has seen its share of notorious crimes. It was home to the first Western gunfight on the town square between Wild Bill Hickok and Dave Tutt, the three trials of the alleged murderer of Colonel Thomas Swope, the founder of Kansas City's Swope Park, enveloped the state. Residents also saw the killings within a few blocks of each other that inspired the songs Stagger Lee and Frankie and Johnny. Vicki Berger Erwin and James W. Erwin explore crimes, criminals, and victims from the violent history of the last 200 years in the Show Me State. About tonight's authors. Vicki Berger Erwin has been in the publishing industry for more than 30 years in various capacities, including sales, book distribution, and as the owner of a bookstore in St. Charles, Missouri. She is the author of 30 books in varied genres: picture books, middle grade mysteries and novels, local histories, and true crime. James W. Erwin practiced law in St. Louis for 37 years. He is the author of 5 books of local history. This is their second book together. And James and Vicki live in Kirkwood, Missouri. And now, if everyone at home would please help me in welcoming James and Vicki to the screen. Big round of applause. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for having us, Shane.
Thank you. I am so excited to be in conversation with you this evening. I'm going to pop up the banner and tell people how to get their copy, how to order their copy, because that is important. So yeah, I'm really excited that you guys are going to come in and sign on Thursday, and that I get to see you, because I haven't seen you in so long. So I'm really happy that you're here, and I'm really happy to be doing this event.
And we've missed being able to come to a bookstore, come inside a bookstore and browse. So it'll be a treat for us.
Yep. And we already have people saying hi from the audience. So great. I'm super excited. We have a great crowd here this evening. And we're going to start with the slideshow. And I'm going to ask you questions while the slideshow goes on. So let me pull that up so that we can go. All right. Okay, so we have the first slide. Here we go. So we're going to talk. Tell me a little bit more about Stack Lee and the story surrounding this.
Stack Lee Shelton was his name. He had nickname was Stack Lee. It isn't clear where it came from. He owned what was called a lid club, which in the front of the club you could dance and you could drink, and in the back of the club there were some women of ill repute, and if you had the money, you could visit them. This is a photo of his lid club. It's still standing, at least as far as I know. I haven't been downtown in more than a year, but last time I was down in that area, it was still there, so I assume it's still around.
And this influenced the song Staggerly?
Yeah, his nickname in the various versions of the song went from Stack Lee to Staggerly to Staggerly, which is probably how people best know it today. It was a hit song for Lloyd Price in 1959. And it, like Frankie and Johnny's, based on an actual incident, an actual killing that occurred in St. Louis, in downtown St. Louis. Not at the Lid Club. It actually had happened at a saloon where he ran into Billy Lyon, and they had a dispute over hats, and he knocked off Billy's derby and dented it. Billy grabbed his Stetson hat. They had an argument. Stack Lee pulled out his .44 and said, "Give me back my hat or I'll kill you." And Billy said, "Go ahead and shoot." And he did, and killed him. And that's on Christmas Day, Christmas evening, 1895. You can do the next slide. This is Billy Lyon's death certificate. Showed that he lingered on into the morning of the 26th, and died of a gunshot wound to the abdomen. And Stagger Lee was tried, had to be tried a couple of times, as a hung jury the first time, but he did go to prison for it. And then the song was composed almost immediately by a fellow named Bill Dooley, who was a black pianist and composer who worked down in the area. And it became so popular all up and down the Mississippi River, and was recorded, over 400 times, I guess. Although the first recording was actually by Fred Waring and the Pennsylvanians, of all people. Not somebody you'd expect to be recording a song like that. But it was very popular. And then we go on to, let's go to Frankie and Johnny. This is Frankie Baker in 1899, 4 years later. She lived with a guy named Alan Britt at Targee Street, 212 Targee Street, which was torn down in the 30s, and on top of it, they built Kiel Auditorium and what's become Stifel Theater and the Enterprise Center where the Blues play. And in 1899, she and Alan Britt got into a dispute. Alan pulled a knife on her. She got out her revolver, shot Alan, and he died 3 days later. She wasn't convicted. She was acquitted on the basis of self-defense. But Bill Dooley, the same guy that wrote Stagger Lee, also wrote Frankie and Johnny. And it was a very popular song. At first it was known as Frankie and Alan, but Alan's family objected to it, so they changed the words title to Frankie and Johnny. And it also was very popular. Been recorded by hundreds of artists. Frankie was plagued by people coming after her to singing the song while she was in town, so she ended up leaving town. Mm. Finally, Hollywood got a hold of the story in the 30s, made a couple of movies about it. One of them was Mae West and Cary Grant, the movie where she told Cary to come up and see me sometime. And the second movie was made called Frankie and Johnny. That was the name of it. The other one was She Done Him Wrong. And that movie came out in 36, along with a mural, if you want to do the next slide. And mural done by Thomas Hart Benton. This is in the Capitol building down in Jefferson City. And shows Frankie shooting Johnny, although this one, she didn't actually shoot him in a bar. It was actually in her apartment. And it was in self-defense. She didn't murder him. But in any event, when the movie came out in 36, she sued the movie company on the basis that it was defamation. She filed a lawsuit in St. Louis. You want to do the next slide?
Actually, before we go to the next slide, I wanted to ask you a question about, so this is maybe not even the first occurrence of there being really interesting woven ties between the chapters. And Thomas Hart Benton is this, or was it his grandson, or
his grandfather,
great uncle. There we go.
Great uncle was Thomas Hart Benton, yes, who had the duel on Bloody Island.
Yeah. So I wanted to point that out before moving on to the next slide, because I just kept seeing these really interesting. I mean, obviously Missouri is kind of a small state when it comes to a lot of the things that happen here. But there are some things that definitely from chapter to chapter where you can kind of see the parallels and the kind of interesting things that go through the history of the state of Missouri.
So. Well, there's actually a connection with another chapter in this one with Ira Cooper, who was involved in Vicki will probably talk about that one, with a murder down in Mexico, Missouri. Because Ira Cooper was not only the first Black police lieutenant in St. Louis, he was also a scholar of music and a journalist before he went into the police force. Well, anyway, Frankie filed a lawsuit, went to trial in 1942. This is how I got involved in learning about Frankie and Johnny, and the story behind Frankie and Johnny and Stagger Lee, because I knew about the lawsuit. And it went to trial. They had an expert who burst into song right in the middle of the trial, singing the song and talking about Frankie shooting Johnny, root-a-toot-toot, and all that sort of thing. They asked her things like, well, did you wear a diamond as big as an egg? And she said, no, it was only ordinary size. Did you buy him $100 suits? She said, no, not necessarily. Did you shoot him root-a-toot-toot? She says, no, I only shot him once. But she lost. She did not win in this case. She went back to Portland, Oregon, where she was living at the time, and died 10 years later. I'm not sure what the next slide is, but why don't we go to it and we'll see what it is. There we are. That's Vicki's.
This is Margaret Mortimer, and this is a murder that occurred in Mexico, Missouri, where I grew up. And I had no idea this had occurred in my hometown until much later when we moved here. And it's something that I've become really fascinated with because it is unsolved. There still is no solution to this murder. Margaret was one of the most prominent women in the town. She was a renowned musician. She performed all over the state. In fact, she was preparing a presentation to do in St. Louis over the holidays. And that's when she was late for dinner on Thanksgiving Eve of 1937. They thought she was practicing for this musical performance. She didn't come home. And this is one of those little things in that you find out when you're researching. They had company. She and her husband Bert lived with Margaret's parents, and they had company, their cousins from California, who had driven across country to spend the holidays with their family here in Missouri, and their names were Mr. and Mrs. James Erwin. The difference is that they spelled their name with an I, whereas we spell our name with an E. Anyways, Mr. Erwin went outside to move his car at one point while Margaret was still absent from the dinner table, and that became very important to what happened later. Margaret had been shopping all afternoon in downtown Mexico, and she visited the drugstore and the jewelry store and the news magazine, the news agent, and she was walking home. They did not own an automobile. She was walking home, and there was a young girl that she had recently encountered at the drugstore walking behind her. When they were about 2 blocks from Margaret's house, the young girl came around her and to get home faster. Margaret wasn't walking quite fast enough for her. The little girl was on her way home, and she heard a scream. And then she heard a second muffled scream. Well, unfortunately, that was Margaret. Someone had jumped out from behind a tree, grabbed her, hit her over the head several times. When she passed out, they drug her to the rear of of a house that was being renovated just a few doors down from where they lived. They, if you want to change the slide, you can see the crime scene. Yeah, to this house, they brought her down to the side of that house, and they were in the process of assaulting her when they think, they don't know this for sure because they've never found the person that did it, when the man, Mr. Erwin, was moving his car, and the lights, when he pulled into the alley, shone directly upon that driveway where Margaret was laying. She died early the next morning without ever regaining consciousness. They didn't really have any clues. The only piece of evidence they had, or the only thing they considered evidence, was that Mr. Mortimer Berger had met a black man wearing a cap and a checked overcoat on his way home from work. And so they kind of limited, as far as we can tell, they limited their investigation to black men, and particularly black men that had been recently released from prison and had any kind of a sexual crime or a crime against women. There were 3 crimes before this that were very similar in nature, although all 3 of those women, they were grabbed from behind, hit over the head with an object, and escaped with minor injuries by fighting off their attacker or screaming and somebody coming along before this happened to Margaret. And so they're not sure. The records from the State Highway Patrol who were involved in the investigation are no longer there. The records from the Mexico Police Department were burned in a fire, and so they're no longer there. So we really only know from what people who were around in those days have kind of passed down to their children, and things that were in the newspaper. One of the things they did, and we should have included a picture of this, there's a St. Louis connection to this story, because there was a police officer, the police lieutenant Ira Cooper. He was born in Audrain County, which is where Mexico's located, and his parents were teachers there, and he had a really close connection with the black community, so they brought him in to investigate as well and to kind of help them along. He did not have a conclusion when he left town. He did not keep written notes, and he fell ill soon after returning to St. Louis and died. So they don't even know what Ira Cooper was thinking. And I have to say, Ira Cooper is one of the most interesting characters that I encountered in my research on this story, and he's worth a whole book in and of himself. A little interesting side note about it was that after Mr. Mortimer Berger remained in Mexico even after his wife died, even though he was from New York, and he was left on the train one day in the 1950s to go to a funeral in New York City, and he was never heard from again until the police called the police in Mexico, and he had collapsed on the street in New York City. They had taken him to the hospital where he died, and he was buried in a pauper's grave until his family finally searched and found out what had happened to him. So that's just one of those little interesting side notes that you find out when you're researching this stuff.
I have a couple of questions that I wanted to ask you about this chapter. So one, the connection to the previous women who were assaulted, they were found relatively quickly, I think maybe, and
the women,
yeah, weren't they found relatively quickly? And
they escaped, or they all screamed or fought him off or in some way got away from him, and they maybe had stitches or something like that, but that was the worst thing that happened to any of them.
And Margaret, it was a long time before she was found, so exactly. There could have been, it could have been something that she maybe was attacked by the same people that attacked those previous women, but because she wasn't found until several hours later, that might be why she unfortunately died instead of escaping with just getting stitches.
Exactly. It was blood loss that was her cause of death, actually. And they would say that one of the theories was it was a transient that had attacked her, and that was why they couldn't find who had committed the crime. The only problem I have with that is those 3 previous women that were attacked in the same way. I mean, it seems to me that there was a pattern, amongst this guy, and he just progressively got worse and worse and worse.
Yeah. And my other question, so we've had, and I think this continues throughout the book, there are a lot of crimes that happen in Missouri around the holidays. And I was wondering if you noticed that as well as I did, like where I kept thinking another one, like right around the holidays. So I'm wondering if you had any kind of remarks on that.
Do you want to say anything?
Oh, I'm afraid I don't have an answer for that.
I don't know if it's that people kind of let their guard down. I mean, that could be one thing that happens. Or my sister's a social worker, and there's a lot of bad things that happen during the holidays. I mean, because people get depressed and things aren't going the way they think they should go. I mean, here's all these happy things that should be happening, and they're not. So I don't know either, but I mean, there's a lot of drinking during the holidays that could have something to do with it.
Yeah, that probably was involved with Stagger Lee and Billy Lyons. That's for sure.
All right, so we can go to the next slide then.
The prosecutor's wife, I kind of think of this one in conjunction with the Margaret Mortimer murder, because this one too was, I could never figure out why did they not look at other people in Mexico. I mean, there were, the population was around 12,000 at the time. There had to be at least 6,000 to 7,000 other men, that they could have looked at, and they didn't ostensibly do that as far as we know. Well, with Harriet McDaniel, she was a prominent St. Joseph wife. Her husband was the prosecuting attorney. There's some kind of strange things that happened on the night she was murdered. Oscar claimed he received a phone call calling him away from home, but when he got to the place that he was called to, his brother, who they were calling about, was no longer there, and so obviously the phone call was a hoax, is what he claimed. He goes home, he parks his car, and he's met with a hail of gunfire. He's been carrying a gun with him because he and his family have been receiving threats from a gang that he's put the leader of this gang in prison, and if they don't release him and drop all the charges, then they're going to do something bad to his family. And so immediately that is who comes under suspicion. They search and they never find the weapon, and they use dogs. The entire police force in St. Joseph, Missouri comes out to look for this criminal, and they can't find him any place. The search continues, again, focusing on what I'm going to just call the bad guys, for lack of any better word. As a writer, I should think of a better word, but that's what I'm coming up with off the top of my head. And anyways, his one of Oscar's rivals is appointed special prosecutor to the case because they want to know what's going on. And eventually, after a coroner's inquest and a grand jury, Oscar himself is indicted. The suspicion is that Oscar, who really likes other women very much, has a woman that he would like to take up with, but he's afraid that if he divorces or separates from Harriet, that it will affect his political career, because he is presently in the race for prosecuting attorney while all of this is going on, and he continues his election activities throughout. He's arrested, and yes, he does have special attention given to that. He asks the police officers if they can walk to the station rather than be taken in, the Black Maria that would otherwise take a guy to jail. They stop on the way so he can buy some cigars. He's held on the hospital ward all alone. They let him go out for lunch. and they let him attend special events being held in St. Joseph, like air shows and some of his election events. Well, he's finally brought to trial. And one of the things that comes up is on the day that Harriet was murdered, there was a divorce between two people. Oscar represented the husband, and there seemed to be a lot of rumors about Oscar and his relationship with the wife, whose name was Dagmar. That couple was never even called. Harriet's family wanted to testify to things she had told them about the state of the McDaniels marriage, but that was not allowed because of the hearsay rule. Oscar himself got up and got on the stand himself and made a very positive showing, and he was acquitted, but he did lose his election. About a year later, Oscar remarried. Not long after that, there was a note that appeared on his law office door that said, "If you have any legal business with me, please see a neighboring law firm." And he disappeared from St. Joseph and was never heard of again until they brought his body back when he died to be buried near Harriet. By then, Oscar had changed his name to Russell McDrew and had been living in California and then in Washington, D.C. since he left town. And I think he was on his third or fourth wife by then, too.
I have so many questions about this case.
Okay.
So first, do you think that he did kill her? Or do you think it was some like elaborate like thing dealing with people wanting him out of the picture?
I do believe that he had something to do with it. I didn't go into as much detail as there is in the book, but there was evidence that the gunshots were fired from the direction of his car as opposed to behind the tree where he said they came from. There were screams that the neighbors heard coming from the direction of the house at 10:30 at night, when he said this happened after 11:30 when he left the house. The children were never awakened during the whole thing and were found perfectly safe. The only things that were taken off the dresser top, that were in plain sight, which could have been taken just to, and after the murder, when the police came to the house about an hour later, he already had his friends in the house, and they'd stripped the bed and burned the sheets and the mattress.
Oh, I don't remember that detail from the book.
Yeah.
They burned the sheets?
So there was evidence that was taken. There were one of the doctors that testified that the murder was committed by someone who was left-handed. Oscar was left-handed, and the doctor also disputed Oscar's story of the position of the body when she was found, that she never could have been in that position, due to the direction of the blood loss and all of that kind of thing. The person that he married within the next year, her father was one of his defense witnesses and he was also the one, if I'm remembering correctly, and I think I am, he was also the one that burned the sheets and the mattress.
Mm.
And so I do kind of believe he had something to do with it.
Yeah. I mean, when I was reading it, I felt like there was like maybe a little bit of like suspicion of like maybe he was set up, maybe he was framed. But I think you've kind of like changed that. I don't think there's no wiggle room anymore. Like I think he's probably very guilty.
Well, there was a St. Louis connection to this one, too, because at the same time that Oscar McDaniel was running for prosecuting attorney of Buchanan County, there was a man named McDaniel running for circuit attorney in St. Louis, which is the equivalent of prosecuting attorney. And he received a note that said, if you don't want to have happen to your wife what's happened to Mrs. Oscar McDaniel in St. Joseph, then drop out of the race. And I mean, it so freaked out the St. Louis Mrs. McDaniel that they had to take her away and hide her until the election was over.
Yeah, that was one of the details that was like, maybe it is just like a large crime syndicate, like
Getting rid of all the McDaniels.
Yeah. Only McDaniels that are working in law. That's the only people that they have problems with.
That's right.
Yeah. All right.
Oh my gosh. I feel like I'm doing all the talking. This is Bertha Gifford, who is one of the female serial killers that has citizenship in Missouri. Something we can, wonder about. But this is another one that leaves a question open. To me, the ones that have a question open at the end of the story or the case, whatever you want to call it, are the most interesting, because I do like to kind of, go through and decide on my own what I think happened. The tagline obviously is Angel of Mercy or Angel of Death. Bertha was married. She had one daughter. She and her husband lived in Morse Mill and ran a hotel. I think there's a picture of that, but let's stay with this picture for right now. In Morse Mill, and she ran a hotel. Her husband was having adulterous affairs all the time, and she eventually met this man named Gene Gifford, and she was attracted to him, and her husband got pneumonia. She was the person that all the neighbors could call upon to help them when they had a sick relative in their house. And she was nursing her own husband, and he died. She used his life insurance to start a new life in Franklin County. Morse Mill is in Jefferson County, in Franklin County, with Gene Gifford. And so they married. Now, Gene's mom and younger brother came to live with them. His mother was in her late 50s, and she also died under the care of Bertha. And she was 59 years old, so nobody found that the least bit unusual, because she was an old lady in the annals of the early 1900s. Then the younger brother, James, was nursed by Bertha and also died. There was a string of people that she would take care of who would die, often presenting with gastric symptoms. Now, for a long time, nobody thought too much about it. I mean, she was always there. She was starting to wear a white apron, and she had a black bag that she carried around with her. And inside that black bag were her own special remedies that she kind of brewed up herself, which was, again, not unusual at that time. There was only one doctor available, and so medical care was very sparse, and people relied upon her. She also showed a really odd obsession with accidents. Sometimes she would travel miles just to be able to view the scene of an accident. She attended every funeral in the area, and she wanted to know all the details about when anybody got sick. And she kept, this was Bertha. This was how she was known. Well, she was taking care of a 3-year-old little girl who was the granddaughter of a man she had nursed and who had died. And the little 3-year-old girl also died, both of them of stomach pains. This is when people really started to talk. And word finally reached the prosecuting attorney of Franklin County, and he began to look into this case. Well, Bertha was so outraged that anyone would think, here I am, out here doing these good deeds, and people are accusing me of these horrible things, that she threatened to sue for defamation or libel? Defamation. Anyone who would say anything bad about her to this prosecuting attorney. At first, he kind of backed off a little bit, but eventually he decided there were too many. People started talking more, and he was receiving all these calls, and he finally had a total of 17 deaths that people reported to him, people under the care of Bertha. So she was eventually indicted by the grand jury. The police chief of Webster Groves, Missouri, for some reason came and got her, took her all the way in town to Webster Groves, kept her overnight, and she eventually signed a confession saying that, yes, she did give arsenic to the two people that she was indicted upon for murder, and but she was only trying to ease their symptoms. She was put on trial, and her defense was actually that was one of insanity, because even the sheriff of Franklin County couldn't quite understand why Bertha would kill these people when there were so many others that she helped, and brought back to health. The jury bought that argument, and she was committed to the state hospital, which was then in Farmington, and that's where she lived out the rest of her life. Now, I talked to her great-granddaughter, who's written a memoir called The Tainted Legacy of Bertha Gifford. And she didn't know for many, many years this story about what had happened. And when she found out, she made trips to Missouri, and she did lots of research and talked to a lot of people to try to find out the truth about her grandmother, our great-grandmother. And I think from reading the memoir and from reading about Bertha's life, kind of convinced me that I think she might have just been insane. And she didn't intend to kill people. She would just sometimes give people the right amounts of her little arsenic mixture, and they would recover. And then in other cases, she wouldn't do that. The one motive that somebody came up with was that she kind of killed people who needed to be killed. Like, for example, she killed Beulah because her mother was unwed, and this was making her life too difficult. Or some of the men that that died while she was nursing them were alcoholics. And one family, there were 3 children that she nursed that ended up dying, and they had too many children, so she was trying to make their life easier by killing these children. But some days I think she did it on purpose, and other days I'm like, no, she was just crazy.
And Vicki, you read the Tori Telfer's book. What was it? The Serial Women?
Oh, yeah.
It's all about female serial killers. And so when I was reading this chapter, I very much was like, okay, she is kind of by definition, like, she's one of the definitions of a female serial killer, in that she got away with it for so long, and there was so much like did she mean to do it or didn't she? And people still like even you, where you're just like, maybe she didn't mean to do it. And I was like, the whole time I was reading it, I was like, she did it, and she knew what she was doing, because you can't be that bad a doctor.
Well, that's the other thing, is why did the doctor never question?
Yeah.
I mean, because it was always the same doctor that signed the death certificates. Now, the one that might have been actual murder might have been her husband, the first one that she killed, because she ended up with something after that. With the rest of the people, she didn't really. Oh my gosh. And that's our special guest, Luna Erwin, our dog. I'm sorry. Anyways, she ended up with that insurance money so she could start a new life. But everything else, you know, she really didn't get anything unless she just got pleasure or a sense of satisfaction from committing the bad act.
Yeah. I mean, I think that she definitely felt like she had reasons for killing the people. But it could have been like that she wanted to see how far, especially because she was saving some of the people, like she was poisoning them, but not not being able to save them. So there could have been that kind of complex going on as well, like where she wanted to save these people, but went too far.
And she did take arsenic herself.
Oh.
So, I mean, and that was not completely uncommon in those days.
Yeah.
To use arsenic for medicinal purposes. I mean, she just sometimes went a little too far.
Yeah.
This is the hotel that she and her first husband managed. It's deserted now. It's abandoned, and this is just a photo that one of a friend on Facebook took for me. So. Finally, you get to hear from Jim Park.
Yeah. The kidnapping of Bobby Greenlease. Although I was only about 7 years old, I guess, when this happened, I actually remember this. It was because it was a huge story at the time. Bobby Greenlease was only 6 years old in 1953. He was the son of Robert Greenlease and Virginia Greenlease. Robert Greenlease was a very wealthy car dealer in Kansas City. He had an older son named Paul by a first wife. Paul attended Kemper Military Academy in Boonville. And another one of the students at Boonville at the time was Carl Austin Hall. Carl Austin Hall was the son of a well-to-do Kansas attorney. He left Kemper after 3 years. He ended up joining the Marines before World War II started and re-enlisted in the middle of World War II. And he actually, except when he was drunk at AWOL, he was a very good Marine. He fought in some of the Marines' toughest battles in the war. He was awarded 2 Bronze Stars for bravery. After the war, his mother died, left him a lot of money, but he ran through it by 1951. He was broke, and he turned to a life of petty crime, and Hall began to rob cab drivers. Finally went to prison for robbing a cab driver of $33. And while in prison, he came up with a scheme. He was going to get rich by kidnapping a rich kid and getting a ransom from a rich guy. And the rich kid was Bobby Greenlease, and the rich guy was Robert Greenlease. In the spring of 1953, he met Bonnie Hetty just after he was released from prison, and he began to plan the kidnapping. He bought prepaid envelopes. He got stationery for the ransom notes. He decided that he wanted to have $600,000 in 10s and 20s that he figured weighed enough they could get into a suitcase or a duffel bag or something like that and be able to carry it around more or less easily. And finally, on September 28th, 1953, they carried out the kidnapping. While Hall was waiting in a Cat's drugstore parking lot in Kansas City, Bonnie Hetty took a cab to the French school where Bobby was attending. It was a preschool. She knocked on the door, and the door was answered by a Sister Moran, who spoke French, barely spoke any English, and she was very shy and was very naive. Bonnie told her that Virginia Greenlease had a heart attack and wanted Bobby to come see her. The Mother Superior wasn't there that day. The second in command was teaching a class. And so Sister Moran went and got Bobby and brought him to Bonnie Hetty. Bobby, of course, didn't know who she was, but as Bonnie said later, he was so trusting. We went back to took a cab back to the parking lot. If you do the next slide, got in her car, a station wagon. It took him out to a rural road in Kansas, just across the state line. And there, while Bonnie was walking her dog, Carl Austin Hall first tried to strangle Bobby with a rope, but the rope was too short. He ended up hit him in the face with his revolver, and then he shot him in the head and killed him instantly. He sent a letter by special delivery that same day. It was delivered that night to the Greenleases. When they found out that Bobby had been kidnapped, they notified the police, they notified the FBI. Under the Lindbergh kidnapping law, the FBI came into the case on the assumption that the straight line had been crossed, and it actually turned out it had been crossed. It was a federal crime. And then began a series of negotiations between Hall and a guy named Robert Ledgerman, who was actually working as the spokesman for the Greenlease family. And Hall sent all these letters. He actually even made phone calls and gave them elaborate instructions on how to find more instructions on where and how to deliver the ransom. And finally, Ledgerman got fed up with him and said, I'm tired of looking in birds' nests and crawling under rocks and looking for things with ribbons on them to try to figure out what's going on. Just tell me where to drop the money. Finally, they did manage to drop the money in Jackson County, and it was picked up by the kidnappers. But Bonnie and Carl Hall decided that there's too much heat from law enforcement in Kansas City, so they fled to St. Louis. Bonnie hid out in an apartment near Tower Grove. Hall went on this kind of bizarre trip around the city of St. Louis. He got a shovel and some bags and things and was looking for a place to bury part of the ransom. Apparently didn't find it, although later people went out searching for it and thought maybe he had buried it somewhere. He ended up with a prostitute at the Coral Court Motel, which anybody from been in St. Louis for very long knows what that was. It's where you could rent a room for a night or for an hour. And she told a cab driver named Hager that she'd seen a lot of money. Hager told a mobster named Costello, who told a lieutenant in the St. Louis Police Department, Louis Shoulders, that they thought this guy was the Greenlease kidnapper. Hager finally took Hall down to a hotel in the Central West End where he was captured by Lieutenant Shoulders and a patrolman named Elmer Dolan. They took him to the police station, but they left the money in the place where Hall was staying. And outside Hall's apartment there, or the room he was staying in, was Joseph Costello, who went in after the two policemen took Hall to the police station. They came back, they got the money, they took it to Costello's basement. There they counted it out, $600,000. And then they put the money back. Well, they put back half the money. About $296,000 was brought back to the police station. Another $300,000+ was left with Costello. Hall confessed to the crime, told him where Hetty could be found. She was arrested. They found Bobby's body buried in the backyard of Hetty's home in St. Joseph, which is up here in the upper left. And the ransom money is shown in the footlocker, or what was brought back to the police station, here in the lower right. If you wanted to go ahead and do the next slide. That's Louis Shoulders in the upper left. Elmer Dolan there is on the right and behind. Carl Austin Hall is down in the lower right, and Bonnie Hetty's on the lower left. And Officer Dolan is holding the revolver that killed Bobby Greenlease. They went to trial. It was a very short case because they had confessed to the kidnapping. They were tried in a federal court. The jury gave them the death penalty. They were sentenced to be executed in the gas chamber in Jefferson City because the federal government at that time didn't have a place to execute criminals. And so they contracted with the state of Missouri to do it. And on December 18th, 1953, they were brought to the gas chamber, put side by side in chairs inside the gas chamber, and executed. Bonnie Hetty was the last woman executed by the federal government until January 2021, when Lisa Montgomery was executed for having murdered Bobby Joe Stinnett and cutting the baby out of her body in Skidmore, Missouri.
Shane, didn't you have some questions about Skidmore?
Well, the reason why I knew about the Bobby Greenleaf case was because of the newsworthiness of the woman being murdered, or Bobby Joe's murderer,
Right.
being up for execution. And something came up about like the last woman that was murdered or was executed was this person.
Yeah,
went in this,
brown-headed.
and yeah,
The Greenleaf's kidnappers, exactly.
Lisa Montgomery was the murderer of Bobby Joe.
Right.
Yeah, which is close to my hometown, and one of my friends went to high school with Bobby Joe Stinnett, which is a small town, Northwest Missouri kind of connection that I have.
Yeah. Well, in this case, the $300,000 that was kept by Costello that night was never recovered. Only $1,600 of it was ever found, even though they had the serial numbers and everything.
Yeah.
And that was justice was very swift in those days. And it was a huge story. It was all over the newspapers, not only in Missouri and St. Louis and Kansas City, but all over the country and all over the world. And as I said, I do remember it from when I was a kid.
Yeah. Before we move on to the next screen, we have a lot of questions coming in, and we are running out of time.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I'm going to end the screen. Well, let's go through the slides really quickly, and we'll just show people some of the pictures. So we have the still from the movie, the St. Louis bank robbery, which is another chapter. This is another still from the movie. The
Ray and Faye Copeland, who were serial killers, who were the oldest serial killers ever to be convicted. Ray was in his 70s and Faye was 69 years old when they were arrested. And they were both condemned to death, but they both died before their sentences could be carried out. And they killed drifters in the course of a scheme to extort money from auctions.
Yeah. All right. Now let's get to some of those questions. Okay. All right. Yeah, a lot of questions coming in. So yeah, I got a message from someone else who has left Bank Books, who I don't know who else is watching this, but yeah, they let me know some of the questions that were coming in from YouTube while I could watch on Facebook. But so I'll start while I read through these questions. Start by reminding everyone that James and Vicki will be coming by on Thursday to sign and personalize copies if you would like. So you can request personalization, because if my parents are watching, you'll be getting a copy of this book because I know you'll be very interested in it. But Fedora, who is a great another local author, says Vicki and Jim's command of Missouri history is simply awe-inspiring. We have someone watching from Minnesota, which is fantastic. Then let's get to some of the questions. Okay, so PJ is asking, what criteria did you use to pick and choose which crimes to write about? Are these all unsolved or especially egregious, or the most famous?
Some are unsolved, some are famous. Some of them because of the people involved were famous, like Thomas Hart Benton, or because the story became famous because it became a song or a movie, like Frankie and Johnny and Stagger Lee, or the Southwest Bank robbery. We wanted to try to have things from around the state, not just St. Louis or not just Eastern Missouri, although there's quite a few from here. And so we have some from Kansas City and St. Joseph and Northwest Missouri. So yeah, it was difficult choosing because there were so many to choose from, I'm sorry to say.
And we had to consider the time factor also, because this is 200 years of crime. So we needed to, cover the time period as well.
Right. We tried to get some from 2 or 3 or 4 from the 19th century and the early 20th century, and then on into the 21st century.
Yeah. When I was talking about them,
she's a friend of mine.
Oh, yeah. I was talking to someone about the book, and they asked me if the Mafia bomb, like the St. Louis, if that was in the book, and I said no, and I know very little about that, so I was wondering if you were considering that.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the chapters that didn't make it. Yes, there were mafia wars in St. Louis in the teens and 20s. There's actually, I think, another book from the same publisher about that,
St. Louis gang
about
wars.
St. Louis gang wars, where you can find out a lot more information about that. But yes, there were mafia gangs and gang wars in the 1910s and 1920s, even into the 30s and 40s.
And in the 80s and 90s, there were some other car bombings that had mob connections too in St. Louis.
Yeah, actually, at one point in the 80s, St. Louis was considered the car bombing capital of the United States. You know, with the Leisure Brothers and others who were involved in some of those crimes.
I think that's the one that they were asking about, because they were about my age, so that would have been a significant story from their childhood. I didn't grow up in St. Louis, so I didn't know anything about it. I was like, what happened? Yeah.
Used to eat down at the, I think it was the Lebanese church where some of those guys hang out, but I didn't really know them.
Yeah. All right. PJ's next question actually kind of is one of my questions as well. So, Vicki, I know that you love mysteries as much as I do and true crime as much as I do, but this is specifically a question about you, Jim. And I guess you could probably answer it both together, but how did you decide to write about crime? Was it because Jim was a lawyer? Jim, were you a prosecuting attorney? And PJ saying that this talk has been really interesting and looking forward to getting their book.
Well, it wasn't because I practiced criminal law. It was only kind of on the margins of it. I was actually practiced almost exclusively, not exclusively, but almost exclusively civil law. I think Vicki is probably, she's the culprit in this.
And the editor contacted me about writing 200 years of, and then he just left a blank and he says, what would you like to write? A book about 200 years of? And I said, what about true crime? And he is also a person who loves true crime books. And so it was a shoe-in.
Yeah. I mean, so many of these things were things that I knew about, but like only very briefly, because I mean, even if you're looking into crimes like in Missouri and around the state, like where like I love true crime too, so I've definitely looked up some of these things before. And the information before your book was scant or scattered, or so bringing it all together and telling the fuller story of these, I know that as a true crime person, I was very interested to read.
Good. Yeah. We like to hear that.
I enjoy writing anyway, so because I mean you can write about sinking steamboats and now Notorious, Missouri, and yeah, I'm very excited that to see what you do next as well. Next up, we have another St. Louis author, Valerie, is asking. So Valerie Battle Kinzel. It is Kinzel, right?
Yeah, it's Kinzel.
Okay, great. So Valerie, who is also a historian and author in St. Louis, is asking, what story did you find most intriguing?
For me, it was the Mortimer one. I mean, like I said, and it's not, I'm actually trying to write a fiction based on it, solving it in my own peculiar way. So maybe I'll finally be able to put it to rest if I do that. So I'm absolutely fascinated with that one and with Ira Cooper.
Well, I have two. One's Frankie and Johnny, because it sort of got me started on this and looking into it. I love the song and the various versions I've heard of it. And the other one, which I didn't talk about tonight, but would be Wild Bill Hickok and Dave Tutt, because that occurred in Springfield, my hometown. And the square, and used to go down there and try to figure out, well, where did they face off? Well, the square is a lot different from what it was in 1865, so whatever. But that was something, and I didn't realize that was really kind of the start of kind of the classic Western gunfight you see in the old movies. The two guys staring each other down and then slapping leather and blasting away at each other. But that happened in Springfield, my hometown. And I guess
and that's
okay with
funny that we all chose like our hometowns as our favorite chapters, because
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. the sheriff who was investigating, what's his name? McElroy.
McElroy.
The sheriff who investigated him lived just down the street from my grandparents, and
Oh my gosh.
I've known him my entire life, and I don't know where he lives now or what, but yeah, we would walk through his yard to go to my aunt's house, and would frequently like say hello. And I read In Broad Daylight in high school, I think it was, or maybe early college.
Yeah, that's probably
All right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had no idea that was like him, and so I'm reading the book, and it's like, I know him, and I am shocked at how little it's talked about at all in Northwest Missouri. Like everything about it, like no one talks about McElroy in like Northwest Missouri at all, and it's hugely famous, but nope, everyone's still very tight-lipped, and I don't know if it's shame or if it is like embarrassment, but yeah, it's not something to be proud of, but it is what we are known for up there. So
not so secret.
yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of people saying hi. Hi, Carrie. Yeah, Carrie from the county library is here. Saying
Carrie.
hi. I know. Yeah, a lot of people saying hello from all over, and Kristen says Luna thinks she's guilty, so I'm with Luna. Yeah, I'm with Kristen and Luna on that. Yeah, like this book, I'll hold it up again, like is just absolutely fascinating, and I am so thankful that you wrote it. I'm so thankful that you did this event with us tonight, and that I got to interview you, because it made me spend more time with the book and dig in deeper and look at some of the details and like really think about like what do I think about? Did they do it? Did they didn't do it? Who did it?
Most fun part. That to me is the most fun part. Well, we thank you, Shane, for having us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you anyway, but to be in this, and we thank everybody out there that took the time to come and visit with us tonight and support our book. We're very grateful to you all.
Yeah. And if you enjoyed the event, be sure to share it. It will be a video after we get done. But I'm certain that if you loved it, your friends will love it too. So be sure to share it and remind them to get copies from Left Bank Books, signed copies available. I want to sell out of this book. I want to sell out of it before you even come to sign them on Thursday. So that's my goal.
Thank you.
Thank you. And audience, really so good to see some of you. So many faces that I know. And I can't wait to actually see all of these people that are commenting in person again. So I will, we'll see everyone soon. Thanks.
We'll see you Thursday, Shane.
Right.
Yep.
Night.
Yeah.
Good night.